Let's examine the domain and range of a function. So let's look at this particular example that has been graphed. So the thing that you need to remember is domain is our x value, which is also our input. So when we're looking at the domain of this function, we want to look at all x values that correspond with the given function that we see graphed here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look to the lowest value that x can be. And so I see right here at x is -1 is where I first start my function. So my function begins right here, and it continues until right here, and that's the end of my function. So all along here I have x values that correspond to my function. So in other words, if I look at -1, I get an output right here of -1 for y. If I put in 0, I get some sort of output here. If I put in x is 1, I still have a part of a line. X is 2 is on that part of the line. X is 3 is right there. X is 4 is right there. X is 5 is right there. However, if I go out beyond 5, anywhere out here, so let's say x is 6, and I go right out here, I don't have any function there. So that's the end of my domain, is right there. So that means that my domain goes from where x equals -1 all the way out to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So to make this a little clearer, I'm going to draw my x-axis. There's my x-axis, just by itself. And I start at -1. That's where my function begins, where x is -1. And it goes all the way to where x is 5. So all those values are my values of x. So x can be anywhere from -1 to 5. So if I'm going to state this as interval notation, I would say from -1, including 1, all the way to 5. Those are my values of my domain. So now let's look at our values of range. So with range, I want to look at the lowest possible value that my function can be. So range corresponds to my y-axis. So let's write that down. So when I'm looking at range, range corresponds to my y values, which are also my output. So when I'm looking here, my output begins right here. That's the first place where my y corresponds with the function that's drawn. And it goes all the way up my y-axis until I get to this function right here, that part of the function. So that part there in red is my range. So my lowest y value in that function is -1, and my highest y value in that function is 2. So that means I'm going to go ahead, and this time I'm going to draw my y-axis, which is vertical. So this is now my y-axis, which is vertical, and my lowest number on my y-axis is -1. So I'm going to write -1, and my highest number is 2. So it goes from -1 to 2. So if I write this in interval notation, Remember, it's everything in between. It's just that now my axis is up and down because I'm looking at my y values. So this means that I start off at -1, and it includes -1, and it goes all the way to 2. So in interval notation, I'm saying my range is from -1 all the way to 2. So if we look at this another way, let's look at this a slightly different way. Let's look at this from where is the very beginning. If I start at the very left of my function, which is here, that means my x value is at -1, and my y value also happens to be at -1. So I'm going to write that coordinate there. If I go to the very right of my function, my x value is 5, and my y value is 2. I can have all those values in between. So here we see that my x goes from -1 to 5, which is what I indicated here, and my y value goes from -1 to 2, which I also happen to indicate right here. So those are two different ways of looking at finding domain and range. Looking at it by what's my input, what's my corresponding output, or looking at my lowest coordinates and my largest or highest coordinates. The coordinates on the left, the coordinates on the right.